Okay, so have you ever imagined, like, you finally saved up enough to buy your dream condo, you paid the full price, you're ready to move in, but then the developer hits you with, whoa there, you can't get the title until you pay some taxes. The worst part, you can't even figure out how much those taxes are until they give you the paperwork. Frustrating,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. That has like a recipe for disaster written all over it. And that's actually what happened in this case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court here in the Philippines. Fil-Estate Properties Incorporated versus Hermana Realty Incorporated. It's officially GR known 231936. And the court decided on November 25, 2020.
Okay, so
It's really interesting to see all the legal stuff that comes up even in like normal real estate transactions.
so break it down for us. Who are these companies and, like, what exactly happened?
So we got two companies. Fil-Estate Properties, we can just call them FEI for short. They're the developer. And then we got Hermana Realty Incorporated. We'll call them HRI. They're the buyer in this situation. So HRI bought this condo unit from FEI in this, get this, luxurious West Tower condominium. And we're talking big money here, over 20 million pesos. And HRI paid it all in full.
Wow, so they paid the full price, probably super excited to get into this fancy condo. What happens next?
Well, you'd think they just hand over the keys, maybe the title deed, and it's all good, right? Yeah, not that simple. See, the sale was done with a contract to sell. It's actually pretty common here in the Philippines. But with these contracts, the buyer doesn't fully own the property until some conditions are met.
Okay, I see. So there's a catch. What were the conditions they had to meet?
Well, FEI, the developer, they refused to give HRI the title until HRI paid the documentary stamp tax, DST. And also, they had to pay other local transfer taxes that come with the property. Their argument was they needed proof that these taxes were paid before they could issue a clean title. Got to make sure everything's legal before transferring ownership, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. FEI wants to make sure everything's paid up. But what was HRI's problem with that?
Well, HRI's argument was how can they figure out how much to pay in taxes without the proper documents? Specifically, they needed the notarized deed of absolute sale, which FEI was also holding back. They said they needed that deed to know exactly how much tax they had to pay.
So it's like, you need this to get that, but you need that to get this. What'd they do? Tried to just talk it out.
Nope. This ended up becoming like a full-blown legal battle. HRI filed a complaint with the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board. We call it the HLURB for short. They handle all the real estate disputes here in the Philippines.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't just a little argument. It was a full-on legal case. So what did the HLURB say?
Well, the HLURB sided with HRI. They ordered FEI to hand over the title and even pay HRI damages for all the delay and inconvenience.
Whoa, so the FBI had to pay them on top of losing the case. Did they accept that?
Not a chance. They were ready to fight this thing. FBI appealed the decision and took the case to the HLURB Board of Commissioners, hoping for a different result, of course.
Oh, so they went to the next level. What happened there? Did the board agree with them?
No, they didn't. They upheld the original decision, although they did lower the amount of damages FEI had to pay.
Okay.
But FBI was persistent. They weren't giving up yet. They appealed again, this time to the Office of the President.
So they went from the HLURB to the Board of Commissioners, then all the way to the Office of the President. Seems like they were pulling out all the stops to win. What'd the president say?
The Office of the President agreed with HRI, too. They upheld the rulings. But even after losing 3 times, FEI still wasn't giving up. They took it even further, all the way to the Court of Appeals.
Wow, this is getting serious. They really wanted to win this one. What did the Court of Appeals have to say about this whole thing?
So the Court of Appeals looked over everything, and they ultimately agreed with the earlier decisions. They emphasized that even though HRI was supposed to pay the DST and the transfer taxes, there was nothing in the contract that said those payments had to be made before getting the title.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like they were trying to be fair to both sides.
Exactly. They also brought up that Catch-22 situation we talked about earlier. How can HRI figure out the taxes without that notarized deed of absolute sale, which, of course, FEPI was still holding back?
So FEI loses at every level. What happens next? Do they finally give up?
You guessed it. They take it all the way to the Supreme Court. That's how much this case meant to them. And this is where things get really interesting for anyone buying or selling property in the Philippines.
To the Supreme Court. I mean, wow, that's dedication.
Right. Talk about a legal marathon.
So after all that back and forth, what'd the Supreme Court have to say about this real estate standoff?
Well, they made a decision that honestly shocked the Philippine real estate world. They sided with HRI. They agreed with all the lower courts. And they basically said the buyer had all the rights in this case.
Wow, so HRI wins. But what exactly did they say? Like, what was their reasoning?
Okay, so the interesting thing here is how they looked at that contract to sell. They said that once the buyer, that's HRI, pays the full price, the contract basically becomes a done deal. Like, it becomes an absolute sale. That means that HRI had every right to demand that notarized deed of absolute sale and the title to the property, too.
So basically, paying in full gives you a lot of power as a buyer. You're not just sitting around hoping the seller does what they're supposed to. You can actually demand that title and that deed.
Exactly. And the Supreme Court made it clear that FI was actually breaking the contract by delaying the deed and the title. They were breaking the law.
Oh.
This decision really set things straight about how these transactions should work. It made it clear that buyers have a right to the documents they need to figure out the taxes, so they can pay them and register the property under their own name.
It sounds like a win for HRI. But I bet this whole thing was a huge headache. They paid in full, but they had to go through years of legal stuff just to get what they already owned.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It just shows how important it is to understand your rights, whether you're buying or selling. And that's true for any real estate transaction. It also shows just how important these legal documents are. The contract to sell, the deed of absolute sale, all that stuff.
Yes, speaking of knowing your rights, what does this case mean for anyone listening who's thinking of buying property? What are some of the big lessons they can learn from this whole thing?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, first things first. Never underestimate having a lawyer look over any real estate contract before you sign. Doesn't matter if it's a condo, a house, land, whatever. Make sure you understand everything in that contract, especially the parts about payments, titles, and taxes.
Right, because as we saw, even if you pay everything up front, things can still go wrong. It's not just pay and get the keys.
Right. The second lesson is, remember how important that notarized deed of absolute sale is. It's not just a piece of paper. It's proof that you own the property. You need it for taxes and to register the property under your name. So if you're the buyer, make sure you're pushing to get that deed once you've paid up.
It's like you need to be an informed buyer
Yeah.
and ready to stick up for yourself.
Exactly. And if things get complicated or you feel like you're not getting all the information you need, don't be afraid to talk to a lawyer. Better safe than sorry, right?
Especially when it comes to something as big as real estate.
Yeah.
That actually brings up another question. We've been talking about buying a condo, but do these same rules apply to other types of property here in Philippines?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All these legal concepts we've talked about, contracts, deeds, taxes, all of it, it's all relevant to any kind of real estate purchase, whether it's a tiny apartment or a huge piece of land.
So no matter what you're buying, the same rules apply. Read everything carefully. And remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to real estate.
You got it.
So this case is like a guide to navigating real estate transactions. But it's important to remember that every situation is different. Things come up, laws change, you got to stay informed.
That's true. Being prepared and ready to adapt is so important.
Definitely. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. This whole case was about a buyer who paid everything in full. But what happens if you're buying with installment payments? Do those same rules apply?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Installment contracts are a whole different animal. There's different financing agreements, different legal things to watch out for.
That's a good idea for another deep dive. So listeners, let us know in the comments if you want to hear more about installment contracts and real estate law in the Philippines. We love hearing what you think. Any questions, suggestions for future deep dives, anything?
Absolutely. We love when you guys participate. It helps us make sure we're talking about the stuff you're interested in. We're here to make the world of law and legal cases something everyone can understand and enjoy.
That's right. So if you enjoyed this deep dive into Philippine real estate law,
Don't forget to.
don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this one. We cover all sorts of stuff, from legal cases and what's going on in the world to history, science, you name it. We try to make complicated topics easy to understand and interesting.
Yeah, we're all about making knowledge accessible. We want you guys to be able to understand the world around you.
Exactly. Okay, so before we go, we always like to leave you with something to think about. So we talked about the whole FEPI and HRI battle and what it means for anyone buying property here. But it also made me think, what happens when it's not two companies? What if it's like two regular people who have a dispute like this?
Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, because then you have all that personal stuff mixed in with the legal stuff.
Yeah.
Emotions get involved. Maybe one person doesn't know much about the law. Like, imagine two friends who get into a real estate deal and things go bad. How would that friendship affect everything?
It'd be a mess, for sure. Makes you realize that even simple real estate stuff can get really complicated. It's so important to be clear, have all the paperwork in order, and maybe even have a lawyer help out.
I agree. It reminds us that laws are supposed to make things fair and organized, but they're often used in messy situations, because people are involved,
Yeah, that's what makes it so interesting.
and sometimes unpredictable.
Very true. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to think about law, real estate, and how people interact with all of it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a real estate dispute or seen one happen? What happened?
Yeah, we want to hear about it. Your stories and experiences help us understand all of this better, and they give us ideas for new topics.
So true. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring with us.